morning and welcome to the Community Development and Transportation Committee meeting for April 24th, 2019. The purpose of committee meetings are for the city departments to pass along information to the city council and discuss initiatives listed on the published agenda. By ordinance, the committee consists of the mayor, members of the city council, and the city administrator. The ordinance mandates the city administrator as the chair of committee meetings. By ordinance, the committee makes no formal decisions on committee matters. Rather, items are voted to move to a mayor and council meeting for consideration and vote, or staff receives guidance from the committee regarding the matter. This is a public meeting, but not a public hearing. Therefore, while the meeting is open to the public, we do not take public comments or questions during committee meetings. Public comments or questions are received at the regular city council meetings held at 7 p.m. in the city council chambers on the second and fourth Monday of each month. The first item on today's agenda is the approval of the minutes for the Community Development and Transportation Committee meeting for March 27, 2019.
Motion to approve. Second.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Judy, second by Councilmember Grower. Any discussion or questions? All in favor, raise your hands. Thank you. Second item on the agenda under Community Development. Number 2, consideration of a short-term rental ordinance. Ms. Wakefield.
Okay. Good morning. I want to talk to you a little bit about short-term rentals and get your guidance on how you want to deal with these. I think most everybody knows at this day and time what a short-term rental is, and it's usually handled through different platforms like Airbnb. This has become a very, very popular use that throughout the country has grown tremendously based on some data that was provided to me that short-term rentals have grown 800% since 2011. In 2011, there were less than 1 million. In 2017, so I'm sure it's a lot more. It's up to like 8 million short-term rentals throughout the country. There are pros and cons. As I said, it's very popular. I know it's not going to go away. It provides an income for the residents, is tourism, because it's very popular when people come to visit your city that they prefer the comfort of a home as to a hotel. So it becomes an alternative to a hotel, and it's tax revenues. It generates taxes, but you have to have an ordinance and a vehicle in which for those agencies to report their taxes. The cons are for the neighbors is that it's out of character with the neighborhoods, impact to parking, noise, trash, and fairness. I think the biggest issue that we have right now with our complaint is that it's just out of character with the neighborhood, and there's a concern with, of course, safety. And enforcement. I mean, we basically, our enforcement is based on complaints, and that's how we deal with them as far as complaints. The Roswell market right now is, as of March 2019, according to Host Compliance, which is a company that a lot of the cities that have short-term rental ordinance use for enforcement, because enforcement is more than just going out and knocking on the door. We've got a complaint. It's basically monitoring those different systems to see what's out there, to make sure that they have the necessary license and make sure that they meet the criteria based on the ordinance set forth. There's approximately 220 listings in the city, and the medium rate is $125 a night. Current status in Roswell is that it's not allowed by code, and there is a loss of revenue, although we have 220 that we know of. We had brought this question to mayor and council previously, but at the time the thought was, well, we will hold off on doing anything because there was pending legislation in the General Assembly to deal with short-term rentals. That was in 2017, and also this past General Assembly did have a proposal for to dealing with short-term rentals, and basically the legislation was to take the regulation of these, or the allowance of these type of uses out of the hands of the local government. The bill did not make crossover. We had thought it may be attached to some other bill, but that did not happen. So the staff's recommendation is that the city pursue an ordinance for the short-term rentals. This would involve amending the Code of Ordinances and the UDC, and also look at the enforcement option also. We've provided you copies of some of our sister cities that have done such ordinances. I think it's Woodstock and the city of Sandy Springs being our next door neighbor. We're getting to, for staff, for code enforcement, we're getting to it's kind of a sticky situation when we get complaints when we know that they're not allowed, and and we're saying, well, we really can't pursue, we're not pursuing it right now because, mayor and council had wanted, again, the previous mayor and council had wanted to wait and see what the state legislators was going to do. So at this time, we're seeking your guidance on how to pursue this, or if you want us to pursue this. We've been working with the finance department and with the city attorney's office to look at the different options.
Floor is open.
So I haven't read the Sandy Springs ordinance, but is there any limit on the number of units in the city, or is that ever contemplated in other cities that you guys know?
I'm looking at the ordinance now. I don't see anything in there on cap.
Remember?
So, I've had a number of complaints from the neighborhood that I live in. Not necessarily people who don't want the process, but it's the Wild West.
Yes.
There's
Yes.
no rules around
Yes.
it.
Yes.
Enforcement is difficult.
Yes.
In a discussion I had a couple of days ago, apparently there's a model, maybe Ann Arbor.
Oh, Napa.
Oh, Napa? Napa, is it Napa, where it was?
Medallions.
Where there's actually medallions that are issued by the city, which gives you an enforcement mechanism, right? That the behavior has to be a certain way. And it just seems to me like we probably ought to, if we're gonna look at doing this, we ought to do a couple things. First thing we ought to do is take a look at some other
Yes.
ordinances. The other thing we ought to do is get some public opinion. I don't know what we're going to hear. I know there's a couple of folks here today who have some opinions I'm sure they'd like to share. But those would be a couple of things that I'd recommend that we do. The medallion idea's got some potential to it, but on the other hand, there's folks who believe that it's a single-family neighborhood, for example, and what's going on. I'm also concerned a little bit about some of these folks who are serving food. So there's a bunch of issues once it starts that we need to understand how to handle.
I think it's pretty clear it's an issue or a trend that's not going away
No, it's
anytime
not.
soon. So I think it's something we definitely need to take a look at. A couple of questions. Just going back to your comment about serving food. I mean, if they are serving food, does that fall under a different category as a boarding house or bed and breakfast? Or I guess I see that as being a little different as outside what I would think of as a traditional Airbnb
We
or
would-
short-term rental.
Check with, usually, my understanding, usually they don't, that you're allowed, I mean, if it's a single-family home and you're allowed to use the kitchen facilities. But that is something that if you want us to pursue this, we will talk to Fulton County about the health food service department.
I was just curious if that would fall under a completely different category that
And then that's what we'll check, in May, we'll check that.
Yeah, because then you get into a B&B, and then
Right.
you're competing against breakfast restaurants
Yes.
and business licenses and this, that, and the other.
Yes.
My other concern is this, is in our neighborhoods, you have places that aren't regulated or registered. And, you know, I have a 6-year-old kid, and if Airbnb or VRBO pops up next to me and a sexual predator or somebody comes in and there's an Airbnb, I'd like to know there's an Airbnb next to me and that's going on, because I, would like to know that there's people that that don't live in the neighborhood that could be living in a place for multiple days while my kid's out playing in the yard. Sure. So, I think it's important that at least there's registration, and we're looking at, we know where this is happening. So, again, I think we need to look at those different models, and if staff can look at the food and the safety elements of it, and come back to us and say, hey, here's best practice right now around the country, and let's look at what we can do and what works for Roswell. What works in Napa might not work in Roswell, but
I also think there might be some consideration around use, like for overnight stays, not necessarily. I know of one situation where some folks were renting out their home as an event space. So that's probably not something that we would want to see in a neighborhood. So just having some rules around the use of short-term rentals too.
Alice, did you have an estimate on what the tax revenue number was?
No, but Mr. Luckett's here.
Saw him walk in, so.
Right under the bus.
Think I'm right here.
I'm not sure what you already said, but we did get a briefing from a company
Yes.
that does this, and they, based on what they found, they were estimating 40 to 50,000 annually.
Thank you.
So you mentioned enforcement, Alice, that goes on today. Can you talk a little bit more about what's been done, or what the challenges have been faced when you've had to go out there to enforce the?
Well,
is it police or is it code enforcement that's going there? And
it's
what do you
code
discover?
enforcement that's going there.
Okay.
Because based on the actual use, because it's short term, it's not allowed by code. So code enforcement has gone out. We've also looked at when we have people that have accessory units. Like, you can have an accessory unit with a kitchen, and you have to sign an affidavit that this is for my family, this is for my housekeeper, and we look at those type things. But because of the previous times that we brought it to council, and the previous, as I said in my write-up, informal and formal, it was like, we don't want to deal with that. We want to wait and see what the state has done. So our response is that the city is looking into this, but we're trying to take the lead, wait until see what the state does. Because, as I said, their position was kind of take the regulation of them out of the hands of the use of it out of the hands of the local government.
So when code enforcement goes out to one of these properties, is it a warning, or what happens?
It's kind of a warning. We don't pursue it through court because we've kind of said stand down.
Yep, got it. Thank you.
And are the complaints you're hearing simply because the homes are being rented, or are there typically problems, I guess?
Well, no, because of the transient nature of the Airbnb, and because they're not registered, because you don't, they're not regulated. It's probably the biggest, the biggest complaint. It's, we could have strange people in our neighborhood, or.
Well, let me say this. I stay in Airbnbs all the time. I have some friends that just got back from Hawaii that were staying in a 6-bedroom, 6-bathroom house in a gated community that was an Airbnb. So it's going on. Now, I also know that when I look for an Airbnb, the hosts or hostesses are rated by people that stay there. And you always look for a 5-star rating, nothing less. And if you cause problems in an Airbnb, that news travels fast in the industry as well. So they're policing themselves. I would think that what we're going to encounter here in Roswell, because we do have our historic district, we do have a lot of weddings here, people want to stay here, And I think that what we're going to find is everybody likes the idea of Airbnb, but just not in my neighborhood. So I think that we have to come up with something that's very, very fair
Yes.
and inclusive.
And
I don't want your job.
No, okay, thank you. And I will say for the ones that we've looked at, and it's been a while, in the city of Roswell, they get very good ratings.
No.
They get very good ratings.
So if it's okay with the council,
So, yeah, I mean, we definitely need to regulate this. That is not a question. The sooner the better. You gave, two examples of the city of Woodstock and Sandy Spring. They both have a good points. Like, for example, the city of Woodstock said that no more than 5 bedrooms.
Yes,
If not, you will be considered, I guess, a hotel.
yes.
So then the definition of the short-term rental also is important to have a clear definition. Both city has one more extend. Woodstock when extended the definition with more details, which I think is better. The more details on our definition, the more clear for everybody. And then obviously we have a lot of neighborhood with HOA, which probably they regulate themselves if they accept or not the short-term rentals. So, so I think that we need to move forward quick before get too out of control, before you get too many phone calls with people confused and not regulated. So I think that you have really good start here with those 2 examples that we can get a lot of ideas from here for our regulations. So I'm supporting and the sooner the better.
I think we've got our direction. If it's okay with the council, I recommend we just keep exploring this and bring it back with, when we're ready.
Absolutely.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you.
I do have one request, so that we're very clear when we get complaints. Is it the committee's position that we will continue to stay enforcement? We'll put them on notice, but we will stay enforcement until the ordinance, they either want to move forward the ordinance, or you say, no, we don't, and then we'll take the corrective action.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how we would enforce it when it's,
Yes, that's why I'm just.
yes.
So the question, how long is going to take you to put together a proposal for us to vote on? Because it's coming now the summer, and I'm sure
Yes.
summer is more popular.
Yes.
I mean, my recommendation is we postpone it indefinitely until we can regroup and explore this.
It's a top priority for us. 'Cause we get the complaints, so.
Priority for 2 years.
Yes, been a priority for 2 years. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Number 3, under community development, annual update to the short-term work program and capital improvement element. Ms. Wakefield.
Okay, so,
Ms. Seibel.
that's okay. Every year, we do the annual update to the short-term work program and this capital improvement element. These are items that are required by the state. This has already been through the planning commission. They recommended approval at their meeting last week. So this will be your resolution for transmittal. It is already advertised for your May 13th meeting. And what it is, as you know, is a list of projects from all the departments that go to the state. And once it's approved by the state, it'll come back to you and just has to be adopted by October 31st of each year in order for us to keep our quality local government status. So this is just an example of the CIE page, and this is an example of our short-term work program page. So I just wanted to give you an update. It is coming to you on May 13th for your approval for resolution to transmit. That is all.
Floor is open.
So can you go back one slide, please?
Sure. This is, okay, so this, when you get the document in your packet in May, what's shown on here is like in red, these are items coming off the list. In blue are new, and green is a change. So like, let's use this is the portion from transportation. And like under the old Roswell Road at Warsaw Road, the project completed date changed from June of 19 to June of 20.
The Oxbow Drive two-way is being deleted. They've updated the Riverside Road to a complete street. So some things are just being updated and other things get changed, and things do come off the list once projects are done.
On the second to last, what can you tell us about it?
The City Green State Route 9 at Magnolia and Canton, it's a project they have out on their list that they are working on still and are possibly could start. My guess is this project will end up moving dates next year because I don't think anything has really started specifically. They've been discussing it probably since 2016. So the completion date of 6/20, right now you can leave that on. This is an annual thing that we do every year. So as long as it stays on the list, it can stay, as long as it stays on the list, it's eligible for impact fees. So if it comes off the list and you want to do a project, then you can't use impact fees for it. So people put things on the list, and things just change and move around and everything else. But if you take something off and say the list is approved, and then in the middle of the year you want to do a project and it's not on that list, you cannot use impact fees. So this is why we put things on the list for the impact fee, so in order to use them.
Can you amend that list at all during that year?
Technically, I don't think so. That's why we have the 1 year, every year we get a chance. And what we get to do.
Jackie, I have a question on Historic Gateway. I don't think that project's funded until, and maybe this is for transportation, but it's definitely not gonna be completed, I don't think, by 6/21.
Probably not, but a lot of it is getting started. So I don't know if Dave is here this morning. He was the one who worked on it from transportation.
And I think the list has to be projects kind of within a 5-year period. So the dates change
Yeah.
and kind of annually when we update it.
So as you see, it's fiscal year 1920 to 23-24. So it stays on the list so that it moves.
Okay,
Okay?
yeah.
So this project could be deleted or modified.
Yep.
As long as they're capital projects, then they're impact fee eligible, and that's one of the requirements of the state law related to if you're going to collect impact fees, you have to do a short-term work program and provide that to the state annually.
All right.
Thank you.
You need to vote on this or just an
Nope.
update? Okay.
It's just an update because it's coming to them already on May 13th, not March.
Item number 4, consideration of a text amendment to the Unified Development Code to section 13.11.6. How is a request for a variance reviewed? Ms.
Okay,
Nybel.
so this has been discussed quite a bit over the last few months with staff and with the legal department under this section of the code. Number 4 indicates that the zoning director will provide a report and a recommendation to the Board of Zoning Appeals. Well, technically, our recommendation, since it's the UDC, is always technically for denial. So before the UDC, there was not a section in the code where we actually made a recommendation. We always did a report on the project. Never, that's not an issue. But we don't normally make a recommendation. And I think Bob could probably explain a little bit better than I can as to why we feel that this should come out.
And before Bob, if I can say, it's having worked in many cities and many states, it's best practice that staff does not make a recommendation because it is the applicant's responsibility to present and to prove the hardship. And many times, if staff's going to make a recommendation, it's going to be related to if there's something dealing with the shape, the size, or the topography of the lot. Many of the variances that received aren't necessarily fall into that category. And as Jackie said, we're going to recommend denial. So it's just like a court case. It's best for the applicant to prove his case before the appeals board.
So if we're always recommending denial, they have to go to the board to prove their hardship. And then the board has the authority, because of their Board of Zoning Appeals, they're quasi-judicial, they have the authority to grant the variance. So did we explain that correctly, Bob?
Yeah, the city attorney's position on this is that unlike other boards where an appeal is taken to mayor and council, from the Board of Zoning Appeals, appeals go to Superior Court. Superior Court judges tend to give staff's recommendations great deference, and if staff recommends approval and BZA denies, then that gives the applicant a leg up going into court. So it's better not to have a recommendation. Obviously, BZA members can talk to staff, like mayor and council talk to staff to get an idea of what's going on and doing things. But the city attorney is very adamant that there not be a written recommendation. It's not a good practice.
I'm a little confused now because Ms. Dybel said that they always recommend denial.
Well,
No, because of this section,
because of this
that's
section.
what they're going to do.
Yep. So
So-
starting, we have it in the past, over the last few years, since this was put in 14, the previous director, and then it continued, staff had a recommendation. Sometimes it was for support, and sometimes it was for denial. And due to recent events, we feel that we need to remove this, and the city attorney says we should not have a recommendation that we put together. Now, we'll put together a report, like if we do a staff report on the applicant and what they're requesting, if they're requesting a setback variance or variance to the BTZ or whatever they're asking for. But we will not put in a recommendation. If this stays in there, then our recommendation is going to be denial every time.
But it hasn't been in the past. Is that
No,
what you're
we've
saying?
had different ones where we've recommended.
No,
support.
but before UDC, it didn't have that.
Oh, yeah, and before the UDC, we did not have a recommendation at all.
In the absence of a recommendation, do you provide some analysis of the situation?
Yes, that's the,
Pros
we
and
would do
cons, so
a
you
staff
would still
report.
do that?
Yes, we do an analysis.
So this makes staff Switzerland on anything that goes in.
On variances.
On variances.
But you're deleting the words, zoning director will provide a report and recommendation. You're taking out the report?
Well, we still do a staff report, so I mean, if you want to state this, we'll provide a
Take
report,
out recommendation.
and we could just get rid of the word "and recommendation."
Yeah.
As a city attorney, does that make sense to you? or-
That's fine.
So we motion to approve with changes?
May I?
No
Sir,
speaking.
we don't allow public comment at this meeting. I can talk to you afterwards, but we don't allow public comment.
Board of Zoning Appeals.
Thank you. I can talk to you after the meeting.
He's from the board.
Someone have a comment?
No, wait a minute. We have a member of the board here, and I'm sure have something to tell us to learn about it. So I would recommend that we let the gentleman talk to us, and maybe we can learn something that we don't know.
Bob and I can talk to him after the meeting.
What about council?
You guys can talk to him after the meeting if you want.
Okay. What about in a public arena?
Okay, we don't allow public comment
We got
at the
that.
committee meetings.
This is a recommendation to,
This is a vote to go to council for
for
initiation.
initiation.
That's all it
And
is.
through the initiation process, there's normally public comment?
Yes, the public comment, once it's
So-
initiated, it'll go to planning commission, and then it will go to council for 2 readings.
Yeah, so all we're doing today is deciding whether we want to move it forward for a vote to initiate.
That's
We're not
correct.
actually deciding anything.
That is correct.
I motion to approve with
With the
changes.
same
Second.
spirit. Sorry.
There's a motion on the floor to approve by
Can
Councilmember Judy, second by Councilmember Grower. Any further comments or discussion?
Can I make a comment? Yeah.
I don't run this meeting.
Oh, thanks.
Go ahead. Floor is
So,
open.
Thank you. So with the same spirit, shouldn't this apply to mayor and council?
The mayor and council for,
Recommendation,
no, that's a rezoning, that's a totally different action. So,
but can also be appeal, the mayor and council decision and take it to court, right?
Well, I think the difference with mayor and council, when mayor and council see a concurrent variance, you're looking at the entire project. Usually if it goes to the BZA, it's isolated to that one or two issue. But mayor and council, you're looking at the entire project. And so usually the variance is related to if the the proposed zoning is appropriate with some type of relief from the regulations.
And I think another difference, and Bob might be able to explain this, is that BZA does have some governing authority in
Yes.
this case. You know, whereas some of the other bodies, you know, do not, with the exception of mayor and council, the recommending bodies only.
Just one other thing, as we go through the initiation process, will we be getting the opinions of the BZA and its members?
Yes. Anybody who wishes to speak.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Motion, second.
There's a motion on the floor to approve in a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, raise your hands. Thank you. Number 5, consideration of a text amendment to the Unified Development Code per section 9.5.11, vehicle sales rental.
Okay,
Stiver.
we also spoke to the city attorney. We feel that we need to add some language to the used car section, vehicle sales or leasing used. Under the use standards, letter A just says the minimum lot size is 0.75 acres. Instead of saying the parcel must be a separate lot of record, because that's what we discussed with legal. However, discussing it this morning, because the issue seems to be, we've gotten calls related to somebody wanting to go into like a strip center or a multi-tenant strip center. And technically, if they did that and they carved out their tenant space and then enough acreage of the parking lot, they could make 7.75 acres. That would still be a separate lot of record if they did that. So we were wondering if maybe instead of saying the parcel must be a separate lot of record, to say cannot be within a multi-tenant center language. That might be what we instead add. Rob, would that be legal? We were talking about that this morning. Could we do that and add that language instead of what we have in red here?
As I understand it, you want to change this to the minimum lot size is 0.75 acres,
That's in the code now,
not within a multi-tenant
center,
center.
something like that. I think, would that be okay?
Yeah, you could work it that way.
Okay.
Depends on what evil you're trying to get rid of.
Right.
We're dealing with people who've been looking at multi-tenant centers to put in a used car lot.
Okay?
And it's maybe different if the multi-tenant center is completely empty and the whole use is going to be the car lot. But we have requests where there's different tenants there and they may have one vacancy and they want to put in a used car lot in that one vacancy.
So,
I don't know what y'all are dealing with. I know this has come up in terms of auto brokers. Would this apply to brokers?
auto broker is an office.
It's an office.
And we take care of that because in our letter that they are required to have for the state, we indicate there's no inventory of vehicles allowed. And they have to sign that, they get it, and it's also a requirement of their business license. So we have that covered.
And maybe before we bring this, if we're approved to move it forward, for initiation, we have a conversation with legal, because I just thought of one. Because there is the Tesla model, which they don't have the vehicles there. They have the office, the sales office, and they have a vehicle inside. And so I would think we want to look at all of that, but that's not a used car, of course.
I mean,
But,
yeah, they have one of those in the middle of Avalon.
yes.
Yeah, and the other issue that we're using the word auto and vehicle interchangeable here, but there's other kinds of vehicles.
Yes.
Yes.
And if we don't do this right, you won't have, golf carts or whatever other kind of,
Motorcycles.
whatever other kinds of things that might be appropriate in multi-tenant or with less than 0.75 acres. So I guess what I'd suggest is y'all take this back and
Yeah, that's what we
clean
were-
it,
yeah. We
can do that.
clean it up, focus
Yes.
it on the, as I think Bob said, the evil you're trying to solve.
We can do that.
So would this affect, I know there are dealers that keep their inventory around town in different lots, like there's some behind the miniature golf course and there's some at Andretti. They're not there, but their cars are. How is that?
Technically not a used car lot because you
Okay.
can't go there and purchase a car and
Mostly
walk
new.
off with it.
Yeah,
That's
Yeah.
storage.
some.
But,
Okay,
but it's a new car
Not new, used.
Why no new? Because, you also take you there sometime to test drive a car that you want to purchase that is at the multi-tenant lot. So they will drive you there and show you the car that is in there, the color, the model, the accessories. And
We'll
then
look
even,
at both
We'll look
then.
at that.
I think it's fair for both. If you want
Okay.
to regulate, have to be both.
Okay, we'll
And,
look at both.
And if the purpose of the strip mall or the multi-tenant shopping is not that, then shouldn't be that.
Okay. We'll bring it back.
Any further questions or comments? Thank you. Item number 6, Hill Street Small Area Master Plan Discussion. Ms. Wakefield.
I think everyone's familiar with this property. It's located right across the street here. Between Atlanta Street, Hill Street, Oxbow, and Forest is approximately 18 acres. We have a proposed development for a mixed-use development on the corner there. We also have the City of Roswell property with, for our police department, and also there's a jail that's not being utilized, underutilized, and there have been some discussion about what should be the appropriate use for that particular property. In looking at this property and going back and looking at some of the older plans that have been done, the Atlanta Street LCI being one, and the Grove Way report and study being the second one, we thought maybe this was an opportunity to master plan this entire area. Now, this is a tad bit different than the historic master plan that we're currently doing, which we're going to bring to you very soon. And yes, we lost the bet, so we owe the mayor a cake. We admit our defeat, but our plans are to bring that to you as soon as possible. But this is a little more defined, where you work with the property owners, because they have the vested interests. You have a mini charrette with the community and the property owners to come up with basically design, uses, scale, so that you have a sense of exactly what's going to go there, what it's going to look like, and it would also be an opportunity for the city to look at how and if you want to program or include city property in this planning effort. It is a task that could be added to as a separate task to our historic master plan scope of work and contract track, and it would be approximately $17,500. So we're bringing this to you for your input. And it's one of those things that more and more cities are doing, or they're doing actual master plan to try and come up with exactly what is the best and the most appropriate use and development in certain areas around the city. Everyone likes the Beltline. All of those little vignettes were master planned to this type of level.
The floor is open.
Also, I think it's a great idea. I think, as we look at this property doing a master plan, it especially coming out of the historic district master plan makes a lot of sense. I guess, could you just describe a little bit about the process? I mean, based on the fact that we've gone through the historic district master plan, will there also be opportunities for public input on
yes,
this project?
yes.
And how does that
Yes.
process work?
That's done through the charrette process, but it's more design than just kind of vision of what you want. It's more actual design and how it relates to the street. You look at setbacks, you look at height. The one thing about the height in certain portion of this area, it's approved for 4 stories, but everything else is 3 stories. When you look at some of the older plans, it talks about 2 to 3 stories. So all of that type of stuff will be taken into consideration with the communities and input. And as I say, this task is one where you have to really engage and be involved with the property owners.
So, that's a good idea, but, my preference will be to invest this kind of money on Holcomb Bridge east of 400. We have many vacant, big spaces, and for many, now for a few years now. So if we're going to start analyzing specific spots in the city, I would prefer to dedicate this money to the East Roswell corridor.
Well,
So if his money is limited, economic resources, financial resources, human resources, I will prefer to see this money and time invested in another area than this one.
well, I'm glad you mentioned Holcomb Bridge, because 17,000 would do virtually nothing on Holcomb Bridge. However, if the budget is approved as presented, a portion of the funds that are in for the update of the comprehensive plan, those funds are to do that very type of analysis to certain areas of the city, and Holcomb Bridge and the Georgia 400 intersection being one of those. So we do anticipate doing that. I mean, for the lack of a better word, this is kind of a pilot. Let's see if this works.
Well, I agree. I think this is a very important piece of property here in our historic district right next to City Hall. And on a smaller scale, then you look at properties such as the Target property and others that are very important big properties. In Roswell, we're mostly infill. We have very few large properties in areas. This is 18 acres, right?
Yes.
Right here. We have very few that we can, but if we're able to get what's best for the city and the property owners, it's a great idea, and I'd be for putting any money toward those, because we do have very few. So I don't think doing this exempts that in the future or even in the near future. So I'm in support of this.
I would agree. I'm also in support of this. And, to follow on Marcelo's point, there are some parcels on East Roswell that I would love to see as kind of next in our priority list that even are outside the 400 corridor. So,
Is this area will be included on the historic district plan, or?
Yes.
Okay, so we're double dipping resources here, and when we have other problems in other parts of the city, so if we're going to pick and choose a specific areas or zones, that will definitely not be my first priority in the city, to invest time and money, so I won't be in support of this idea.
This is a unique block in that it's got city property in the middle of it with necessary city uses and potential future city uses. For example, a 911 center,
Yes.
potentially a fire station, other potential city uses that blend in with the other uses. And the most important, or the other important thing here is this is a piece of property that's a connection. It's a connection from, on down towards Oak Street and potentially on down towards the square. And so I think it's important that instead of piecemealing things into this one, taking a little bit of time to figure out, working together with both landowners, people who want to put something there. I think you got a chunk of AT&T in the middle of it too, don't you?
Yes.
So it's a unique square rectangle, it's a unique rectangle there, and I think spending the time on it and piloting this is important. I think, as Councilmember Wilsey said, it's a great pilot for what you might want to do in a couple of the places over on the east side of Roswell. But I see this as the next step down from something like a historic district master plan. Now you've got these ideas and concepts. Now let's go into it and see what we can as a group. And that group means, everything from landowners to people who want to develop to people who don't want to develop. What can we do with it? And it takes the guesswork out of it. We don't have to sit and necessarily wait for somebody to come along with what they want to do. We can go out and potentially ask for what we'd like to see there.
Sure.
I just think it's a neat pilot. I think it's a good first step. I could see, for example, the Target out on the east side following maybe at the same time as something like this. I think it's a really good way to to direct kinds of things that the city and citizens want without, take the guesswork out of it.
Well, I think another thing that we need to look at is the fact that the city owns property there.
Right.
And people are asking us to partner with them.
Yes.
So we need to know what we want for our property, and I think it makes sense to look at this whole area. Regarding the East Roswell, I would like to point out that the Economic Action Committee has dusted off a study that was done of the Holcomb Bridge corridor, and it specifically goes into nodes and how you pulse development into nodes. And I think that what they're going to do, if my understanding is to take a closer look at that, work with staff, and really dust that off and bring it up to date. So the groundwork is already being laid for this type of thing, because the nodes have been identified. So I do think that we should move forward with this for those reasons, but then also, this is our backyard. So, if you think about it, we've got the library on one side in Smith Plantation, we've got the Cultural Arts Center behind us, and then this is our other border. So in terms of a city complex, a city hall complex, what types of things do we want to see there? What are we looking for? So I think this is an important exercise.
Any further questions or comments?
I say move forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're looking for your support, obviously. I think formally, we're not looking for a vote on this, but just support, because we will be bringing this plan at some point when we're finished back to you all to adopt it. I think on the back end of this thing, if this is successful, this will be our playbook moving forward. I think some of the mistakes a lot of cities make is they sit back and hope certain development comes to their community, and hope is not a method, so we need to be proactive on this. This to me is a very important endeavor for us as a catalyst for what kind of development we want to have come in. So, anything else?
Thank y'all for being proactive on this and thinking outside the box here and doing something we might not have done here previously.
Thank you. Item number 7, Economic Development Review Proposal from Carl Vincent Institute, and this one is mine. If you recall, this was added to the fiscal year 19 budget during the add-delete process, funded at $50,000. I brought it back to this committee a couple months ago. The direction was to go out for an RFQ to seek proposals on this. After that, looking at it, $50,000 really isn't a whole lot of money to put towards a project like this. So I thought it'd be best if we tried to contact one of our universities that we have partnered with in the past that has done work like this. So I contacted Carl Vincent Institute and went back and forth a few times on the proposal. They got us a proposal which is in your packet. It's adequate. It does the typical stuff, stakeholder meetings, doing some analysis, and coming back with some recommendations. I think we need to do a deeper dive than that. So I've got 2 issues that I kind of outlined in my memo. One, of course, is the timing. We have a lot of stuff going on right now. The strategic plan's underway. We have other plans coming up. We've got this plan we're going to do with Hill Street. So there's a concern about stakeholder fatigue with that. And also with the strategic plan, I think we're going to have a lot of healthy discussion about economic development. So I think we have an interest in waiting and seeing what comes out of that strategic plan before we start moving down a direction with this. And the second, of course, like I said, is the cost. In my experience, $50,000 is not going to get us very much. So if we are going to do some sort of deep dive into our economic development, my recommendation is we wait until after the strategic plan is done and then fund it at a level that's going to get us the scope of work we need to get us the answers that we're looking for. So my recommendation is we just eliminate this from the budget and the work program at this point, and after the strategic plan, next year's budget, we can build it in if it's something that's identified as a priority. That is my recommendation. So the floor is open.
Let me ask a question, because I know the East Roswell Economic Action Committee is going to, I'm sure that they would prefer to have some services. They're not being funded. And looking at things like the Holcomb Bridge Corridor Study, I'm wondering if this money would be better suited in that arena. So you put the money there, and that would provide some of the resources they might need to dust off an old plan, bring something forward.
I think it's a great idea.
So Gary, I'm supportive of your recommendation to hold off on doing this. I'd also encourage you to maybe bring forward your concept for what you'd like to see as, an economic development director, which is what this was originally designed to help us with. If this opens up $50,000 worth of funding to do something economic development-wise, I'm supportive of it. We should just bring that forward and talk about what that might be. But I think to do this right now is probably not the right time.
I would be open to the mayor's thoughts as well. I think it requires further discussion of what that looks like and where we're going.
So I see the scope of work that they've been discussed with the Carl Vinson. There's two. One is the clear vision of its economic development efforts, and the other one is the city current structure for economic development and develop additional models for consideration. I personally think that, on my view, since that analyzing the current structure, if we have the best structure for economic development is the key here, because then everything will follow once you have the structure. If you have the structure, the right structure in place with the right resources, with the right intellectual manpower, then everything else is impossible to either visualize or implement. So I think that for me, everything started to have the right structure, and we are not sure if we have the right structure, if we have the right resources, if we have the right collaboration with many economic development entities and players in the area, in the state, in the Southeast region, and in the country. So for me, the starting point, the one we need to start now, is analyzing the current structure. Is this the most effective, efficient, and productive structure that the city of Roswell can have and afford? Or is something else out there that we can implement in terms of the structure? So postponing analyzing the right structure, I think, is a mistake. I think it's the starting point. If you don't have the right structure, then impossible to come with anything later. So I would like to continue this and also maybe refocus the scope of work exclusively and only to the current structure and consideration of different structures. So I think that that is the starting point from my point of view in economic development. So I will support this moving forward and focusing on the structure only, and leave for the strategic plan about the first point that the scope was the vision for its economic development efforts. So, and also I would like to know when will be ready the strategic plan, because
We're looking at probably, I'd say December, having the plan before the city council for adoption, around December of this year.
Okay, so waiting 8 months on economic development, I don't think is acceptable for the community. We just read that, GM Technology Center lay off over 200 people, pay salaries. Is there on the Atlanta Business Chronicle a month ago. So I think we cannot afford to not work on the right structure moving forward the city of Roswell economic development. Because we all know that we need more better paid jobs, more diverse industries. So I think that having the right structure is the starting point. So I will support to continue with this study and refocus on the structure analysis and considerations and proposals.
The chairman of the East Roswell Economic Action Committee will be at our next committee meeting to present, give you guys an update. Part of the charter is they've got to give you a quarterly update. Maybe we defer this item until then, hear from Mr. Perry about what they're doing, they're going to be working on, so maybe it'd be better to have that discussion at that time so we can see exactly what kind of funding they're going to need. Because I think that's a great idea to divert this, to allow them some room to do some things.
And to that end, Gary, you know, some of the things that Councilmember Zapata was just talking about, I think you can do internally from your experiences and bring forward to us, potentially without having to spend $50,000 to do it in another study. So if you can use your experiences to bring something forward, that might help us get going. And again, the sooner the better on something like that.
I agree. I agree that we should be having the discussion because I think the structure is very important. You had a lot of good points. I also think that we need to consider how the DDA plays into that. We've had discussions about the DDA's function with economic development, as well as, you know, our partner organizations, as well as internally. So I think that that's a bigger discussion than just the structure within City Hall, because we do need to look at the DDA as well and resolve some of what I feel as though we have expectations, and we're going to talk about it through the strategic plan, but we have expectations, but others don't know what those look like. So, and we don't know what each other is expecting of the DDA or Roswell Inc. or an internal person that would be economic development. So I think that we should look at all of that. I know Gary has talked about, you know, having an internal support staff for DDA, which is what normal cities do. So I think this is a much bigger picture that we need to continue the discussion, but I do appreciate all of your comments. Great comments.
I agree that both of them are very critical initiatives, the strategic plan and the economic development plan. I do think that running them in parallel is going to be a bit of a challenge, and that what comes out of the strategic plan will drive the economic development plan. I also like the idea of using some of those funds for East Roswell, particularly if we can take a look at using some of the money towards master planning some of the nodes that have been identified and kind of taking, you know, what's been done in the past just one step further.
Yeah, I think in all of the plans, if you go to the committee website for the East Roswell Economic Action Committee, you'll see that we populated that with all the prior plans that have been done, studying all the stuff going on the east side. I think the study you're talking about, Mayor, goes back to 2005. Was that the corridor study that we did, revitalization study? So if we're going to look at those, if we're going to use those as a basis for moving forward, we need to update those plans, and that means funding. So I think back to your point, that would be that'd be workable.
And to the mayor's point, I think what's important here moving forward is whatever you want to call it, Team Roswell, whatever, but holistically, we need to look at DDA, this,
Everything.
what we've looked at before is siloed. All right, economic director. All right, well, economic director doesn't have the best chance at success if he's not working with all the different pieces that are around him to make everything work together. So holistically, when you do a strategic plan, and I've never done a strategic plan, but my understanding is it looks at holistically on how all the pieces work together, and then therefore we can then take that and put it into where we're going as a city. And so I'm very excited about that, but I agree, we need to start looking at how the DDA helps Roswell Inc., that helps, you know, community development, that helps transportation, and put all the pieces together, because we've been siloed for a while, and I think it's very important that we look at it holistically and not one plan at a time.
We're a very unique city in that setup. So, you know, not knowing really what kind of scope of work we want without having those groups together and answering those questions, we're not going to get that from this proposal. We're going to get the basic stakeholder meetings, visioning sessions, and they're talking about doing comps in just Georgia, which I think we need to expand that. we're just not going to get what we need out of this proposal
Great.
at $50,000.
So when we discuss structure, like I just mentioned a few minutes ago, is analyzing the collaboration with many different economic development entities. I just said that. So it's not a one economic development in any city, in any part of this country, the world, is only one entity, one person. It's a collaboration of many different economic development entities and players in the North Fulton, in this case, in the state of Georgia, in the southeast region of the country, and the whole country. So, this is what I say the structure. The structure is not one silver bullet. The structure is many different players who have to be working in a coordinated manner and servicing all of them the best interest of the community of Roswell. So if there's any idea out there that is only one silver bullet that will resolve, that is wrong. That is really wrong. It's many players that today we're not make them play together. We have players, but not a team. So with this structure analysis will come out is analyzing all the different players that we have already, we're working with already, how many we're not working that we should be working, how many we're working that we shouldn't be working, and all this come in a study to suggest what is the optimal structure for economic development in the city of Roswell. So again, we need to take a look of all the different players and actors on economic development. And we are not doing this, we have not been doing this, and definitely they're not working all together. So that is a starting point for me, and that is critical for me and the community to have resolved and moving forward after so many years of dancing around.
Gary, what do you need from us?
My recommendation is we defer to the admin committee meeting so we can have a conversation with Trent Perry, the chairman of the East Roswell Economic Action Committee. We can put this on as an item after that so we can decide on what direction we want to go with this.
So moved.
Motion on the floor to defer.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Judy. Any further discussion or comments? All in favor, raise your hands. Any opposed? Thank you. Councilmember Spot is opposed. Item number 8 under transportation. Thank you, Allison, Jackie. Under transportation, discussion regarding changing the date of the November 2019 Community Development and Transportation Committee meeting.
Hey, good morning, everyone. So we are requesting to change the date for the Transportation and Community Development meeting in the month of November. We do not have a December committee meeting for the approved calendar, and the November meeting falls the day before Thanksgiving. So it's a Thanksgiving week. So we were suggesting to bring it back a week. So November 20th is the day where we would want to have it, just to be sure we have a quorum.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion approved by Councilmember Guerrero, second by Councilmember Zapata. Any discussion? All in favor, raise your hands. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 9, consideration of developing a policy or ordinance regarding rental scooters within the city of Roswell. Mr. Ralph.
So, thanks, Gary. Dave Cox is going to present this item. He led the effort. He did most of the research, so I'm going to let him present the slides.
Thank you, Mohammed. Well, good morning. I'm here to talk about one of our favorite new topics in transportation planning, electric dockless scooters. So just to recap the issue, they first hit the markets on the West Coast in 2017. I think Santa Monica was the first, and San Francisco was right behind them. And they basically made their way to Atlanta about a year ago. If you've been anywhere in Midtown or downtown or anywhere near the Beltline, you cannot miss these scooters. They're parked everywhere. They're laid on the ground everywhere. And people are riding them all over the place. However, in fall, about 6 months ago, some staff here at Roswell noticed a few of them here in our city. I think a couple of them were spotted on the ground up near 92 and Crabapple, and then more staff saw someone actually riding one on Crabapple or Canton Street, I believe. So that prompted action from transportation, and we wanted to discuss with you what we need to do about it. Several cities have already prohibited them and passed rules regulating them or their fleet size or charging them fees to kind of manage their programs. So we're going to seek guidance from you on what possible options we may do here in Roswell, whether taking no action, prohibit their use, or permit with certain conditions. So the other reason we're talking about it is there's lots of news headlines. If you look in every major city that has them, you'll see news headlines on a variety of topics, talking about safety, fatalities, injuries, even a fire hazard. My favorite was out in Austin, Texas. They recently had the South by Southwest Festival in March, and the city was overrun with electric scooters, and the police had cordoned off certain parts of downtown for pedestrian use only during the festival, and they compiled the Leaning Tower of scooters in Austin, which was a social media sensation back in March. So we're going to dive into a bunch of these different elements in a moment, but we wanted to recap the rules that are on the books today. Georgia state law currently treats scooters as vehicles, so they're similar to a moped or like a small motorcycle. Most importantly, vehicles or these scooters are not permitted to operate on sidewalks. So please keep that in mind. That's Georgia law. They can't be in sidewalks. They cannot be ridden even in crosswalks. Similar to vehicles, they have to stop at stop signs and red lights and yield to pedestrians. And if you consider the scooter, if it's under 50 cc or a moped, the user must have a driver's license and require helmet. If you've been down to Atlanta and you've seen people riding the scooters, how many helmets do you see on the riders? There aren't very many, if any at all. The Georgia State Legislature was considering legislation earlier during the session. However, it didn't make it to the end of the session. It got tabled, and they're going to try to revisit that likely during the 2020 legislative session. So now that we've talked about that, let's get into the analysis that staff looked at. We have been tracking the policy locally and nationally through several cities for the past 6 months. We sat down and kind of had a charrette with our internal stakeholders, Roswell PD, Rec and Parks, as well as ComDev, and we came up with a variety of issues, which I'm going to go through very briefly, just so you guys can think about it as we did before we get to the guidance part of this discussion. So this is one of my favorite pictures. This is the downtown connector right by Grady Hospital. That was one of the first big pictures we saw in Atlanta media of scooters. That was on northbound connector. So as I mentioned, sidewalks are off the limits per state law. Bike lanes and shoulders are possibilities for scooters. However, the staff at Roswell isn't recommending that, mainly because our network is very fragmented. Bike lanes is incomplete. There's a lot of great places down by the river, but once you get off of that, there aren't many places that a scooter could ride for very long, so they'd be in the travel lanes. Same goes with roadway shoulders. Some places in our city have wide shoulders, but then it narrows shortly thereafter, so scooters, I would imagine, would be going in and out of those facilities. Travel lanes are allowed, but they're not recommended by staff, mainly because if you're a person on a scooter and you don't have any protection, you're in the same place as a 2-ton vehicle doing 35, 45 miles an hour. So there's obviously going to be a hazard there. Also, there's going to be some impedance to traffic flow. If you're out on Pine Grove Road on those hilly sections and you have a 15-mile-an-hour scooter, that's going to conflict with traffic if it's in the travel lane. Not just for the blocking of traffic, but if you're in a vehicle, you may be inclined to pass a scooter, which may make you do some dangerous things to get around them. So that would kind of create an unsafe situation.
Before you flip, I'd like to point out that guy is wearing a helmet though, so.
So he's safe. He's being safe.
And he's near Grady, so.
Yeah, he's right by across the street. So yeah, this is a really good situation. So parking is one of the other big issues. Just things to consider. Where can scooters park legally? Can they be parked on the street? Are people going to park them on the sidewalk? If you've been to Atlanta, you see them all over the sidewalk. This picture here on the left is right by CNN Center in the arena. I took that a few weeks ago when I was down there. That's just a small sample of how scooters are parked. You can see they're not always neat and orderly. Also, we're not sure how people are deploying them. This is in Austin, Texas. Someone deployed a whole stack of them in a parking space. So I know parking is at a premium in certain parts of Roswell. I'd hate to see scooters deployed taking up valuable parking spaces in certain areas. Another thing to consider is if they're not parked on public property, where are they going to be parked on private property? Are people going to complain? Who's going to be responsible to resolve those issues if scooters are left? I've heard stories around the country, scooters are ending up in lakes and rivers and trash cans. because people are not happy with scooters being left on their property. So just something to consider. And lastly, our historic district. That's kind of a unique situation. I'm not sure how the historic district would react to scooters being present or left in various places around the city. So just keep that in mind. So we talked about all these issues. Enforcement was the big one that just kept coming up over and over again. We can make policy, rule makers can make all kinds of different regulations and ordinances, but unless you have the manpower to enforce it, it may not be as meaningful as you'd like. I know in Atlanta that we have lots of state laws and the city has passed rules and regulations, but you still see people breaking these laws all over the city. So Roswell PD, they have a lot on their plate already. We have a great traffic enforcement unit, but they're busy responding to speeding and other complaints around the city. So, who would be tasked with tracking down moving violations, parking violations, if scooters are parked illegally? Those are just things we have to consider as we move forward. Also, who are we going to ticket? If there is a violation, are we going to ticket the rider or the company who owns the scooter? Those are just policy decisions we'd have to sort out. And then lastly, we heard from the Athens, Georgia Police Department. They had a tremendous problem inventorying scooters that were impounded. We had a lot of issues out there. We heard about they had a mountain of scooters that were confiscated because they were illegally parked or for whatever reason. And someone had to inventory them and give them back when the scooter company paid the fine. It was a real burden on staff time just for that reason alone. Now, this is one of the more interesting ones that when we learned about this, we weren't really expecting, was the storage of these things. So one of my pictures I like is this guy is storing or charging 40 scooters in his apartment. And it looks like a kid's bedroom, given there's Disney characters on the wall. But this was just something that people are doing. They are making a living at this. There are people who do this as a full-time job now. I don't know how they're paying their taxes. I would love to see their W-2s. But I don't know how they are being compensated anywhere from $4 to $11 per scooter per night in certain markets. I think Los Angeles is awarding up to $10 or $11 per scooter. So there are people who do this for a living. They just bring the scooters home and charge them every night and make their income. This was taken in Santa Monica. The guy, we're here in California, in a convertible, and you can see he got pulled over for having all these scooters. So I don't foresee that being a huge problem if it ever happened in Roswell, but just things to consider. If you have people going around hunting for these things in the evening, they may be impeding traffic. They're parking illegally to jump out to go grab a scooter on the curb. Also, they'll be deploying them every morning. The companies require they be deployed by a certain hour in the morning. And then the other issue, I wish the fire chief was here. There have been reports of fires. People are charging these things. Outlets, electrical issues at their homes or residences aren't up to par. They're plugging these things into extension cords and that kind of thing, and power strips. So there have been reports of home and fires at residences because people are charging them. Crime, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. This was just an issue we wanted to make you aware of. I know in some areas driving while intoxicated has been reported. We have an open carry zone on Canton Street where people can bring their alcohol and beers out from the restaurants. That could be a concern if they hop on a scooter. There have been what we call scoot and runs. That's a new term. It's actually a thing. Where people are causing collisions or accidents and they're just getting on their scooters and riding off. They might get in an altercation with a pedestrian and they take off. And also some smaller crimes where usually youth are going around looking for open, unlocked cars to break into, and the scooters just help them get there faster. So these are just minor things. There's been some headlines on more serious crimes, but I don't foresee that being a big problem here, but I just wanted to put it on your radar. Some legal liability that we want to raise attention on was there could be increased liability to the city if scooters are discarded on sidewalks. It may become a tripping hazard to pedestrians. If you're walking down the street buried in your phone, it's very likely you could trip over one and while you're not paying attention. This is an example in San Francisco. You can see a multitude of problems here. Not only are they laying on the ground, they're blocking the handicap ramp and a fire hydrant. So this was kind of just things that may be problematic. I'm not an attorney. I know some great ones that may be in the room. But one thing I've read in some articles that If you were to go after a scooter company, I believe they're all based in California, it may be challenging to file action against the scooter companies. It may require you travel to California to file your claim. So that's just something, if you're looking for damages, you may be looking at other entities closer to home. So it's just something to be mindful of, just in case, one concern we have at staff is, if you're on a scooter and you crash because of a pothole or you hit a curb, who's to blame for that? So, these are just things you want to be careful of, because I'm going to talk about public safety, and this was the big one. Basically, for any city government or county government, public safety should be the top of our list for our citizens. So there's obviously a risk here to both the riders and our innocent bystanders who may be out and about. We've heard emergency room visits are on the rise. Urgent care visits in Atlanta were on the rise. That was on WSB a few months ago. So there's been a lot of scooter-related incidents that require, medical attention. We were down at the Atlanta Regional Commission last month, and the spokesman or the presenter there said Grady Hospital's getting almost 100 visits per month to their ER for scooter-related injuries. It's gotten to the point where the CDC is actually investigating it as a public health concern. And also, there's been several fatalities around the country. The one I want to point out is Woodstock. There was a gentleman from Woodstock, Georgia, just up the road, who died in March out in San Diego, he crashed into this tree and sustained a severe head injury and later died from his injuries. And then I just noticed in the news the past couple weeks, the city of Woodstock just passed a ban on scooters. I don't know if they were related to this or it was just a coincidence, but that was something I wanted to draw attention to. That he was just renting a scooter. I don't know if he was on the sidewalk or not, but he crashed into a tree and he lost his life because of it. So just to wrap up, conclusion, it's unclear if Roswell will ever get scooters. I don't know if we're a viable market for these companies or not. I know they're in Midtown Atlanta, they're in downtown Georgia Tech, they're in Decatur, they're in other cities like San Francisco, Austin, Boulder. I know the demographics of Roswell are a little different than those places, so we may get them one day, we may not, but it's good to be having the conversation. The legislature down at the Capitol may be passing new legislation during the next session. But the one thing that staff wrangled with was how will this improve our quality of life given all of the things we talked about? Yes, there is some benefit to last mile connectivity, giving people another option to go short distances. There's a lot of benefit, like in Atlanta, a lot of people do favor the scooter program. However, there are a lot of risks and challenges associated. So staff are really kind of trying to get our head wrapped around that. How will this improve things in the city? So again, the options are we don't do anything. We just kind of keep an eye on it and see what rely on existing laws. We prohibit the dockless scooters outright, or we do some kind of in between. We restrict or limit those accesses to the marketplace. A lot of cities are allowing, they're not putting out for bid, but they're putting it out for proposals to allow one or two companies come in with some kind of fee structure to limit their fleet. And also we'd have to define how and where they're operated, how they're stored, deployed. So the staff recommendation based on our stakeholders here was to prohibit them, but we can definitely have that conversation. I'd like to get y'all's feedback.
Floor is open.
So I guess my opinion on this is, I wouldn't be ready to just outright ban them at this point. I think they're in many ways the future of last mile connectivity. I think right now, I just looked on both apps because I am guilty of using a scooter on occasion, but there's only one in the city of Roswell right now based upon the app, right? There's a Lime over on Crabapple at 92, so, and there's no birds. So it's not a problem right now. I think we've seen a couple, there's kind of these mysterious sightings of them riding around Roswell, but they're not a problem yet. And I think that this is a chance for us to potentially be innovative and think creatively on how to work with these companies. So, my opinion is I don't think we should ban them. I think we rely on existing laws. They're not a problem in the city right now, and I think we should use this as an opportunity to think about ways to be creative and measured in the way that we bring these to Roswell, if there's even a market for them, as you said, because people aren't going to ride them, I don't think, from their house in this area over to East Roswell or something like that, so. And given they're not a problem, and I don't see them being a problem in the immediate future, I think it would be a missed opportunity if we just banned them, is my opinion, so.
I would agree with Sean. I think this is definitely something that deserves some close attention and some public input, kind of on just general feeling on what the usefulness and what the positives are in Roswell. And then also maybe looking at some areas where, it might make sense. We are limited based on speed limits and state roads and just traffic volume as to where it's practical to use them, but there might be some places where it did make sense. So again, I think getting some public input and just taking a close look at it creatively, how we could creatively use them would make sense.
And I think the other thing is it took 30 seconds to look and see how many scooters are in the city, right? So maybe staff could just monitor that, and if we start to see that they're accelerating in terms of how many we're seeing in the city, then, we can take more immediate action, but it's easy to diagnose the problem using the apps, and right now we don't have one, so.
Okay. First off, Dave, thanks for the great PowerPoint as usual and the humor and levity in it. That's always
what I can.
appreciated. I like the spinning wheel there. That's pretty cool.
It's supposed to
It's
distract
making me a little dizzy. If you could not do that
Keep
again.
quiet, changes direction.
So I kind of agree. I think I believe there's an Ann Arbor ordinance. I think that's where you mixed it up earlier on scooters and some different really innovative ways of looking at what's coming in and figuring out how do we, if it's a place where only scooters are allowed to drop off, you can't put them anywhere else. I know that's a slippery slope, how are you going to enforce that and all that type of stuff, but really getting ahead of the game and looking how do we work with these if they are going to become a reality to help business and help our citizens, and if that's what they want versus, no, you're not going to come here and, the state legislator might take it out of our hands in 2020 and we might have to work under that as well. So I just think we need to keep our finger on the pulse here, and if we start to see an influx and then we probably need to react. But in the meantime, I would just say, kick it back to staff and look for some innovative ways for us to work with these folks because it's something that's coming.
So I'm going to jump on the bandwagon. Thank you for the presentation. I'm certainly not prepared at this time and would, to take any action, but, let's see what develops. There's more to it than just scooters. And part of it, I think, would be very interesting inside Roswell. For example, these companies also have the dockless bicycles.
Yes.
And wouldn't that be an interesting thing to have here in Roswell, the ability to jump on a bike and go somewhere? For those of us who don't yet own a bike, Mayor. So I'm just not prepared to tell these folks, these companies, Roswell doesn't want you, because it may also take away the good things that we could possibly get from it. So I'll join in.
One of,
Go ahead.
my thought is, okay, you can hop on a bike in Roswell. We don't have very many of them, but we do have some in our park areas. We've got a company that I believe is going to come and put the charging stations for the bikes out here by our charging stations. I talked to him in passing the other day. He told me that he's been working with you all. So we've got bicycles that you can rent and move around the city in. We've got, we can't, I don't think, rent golf carts, but we have had incidences of golf carts involved in hit and runs in the city. Then the other questions I have are, if I own a scooter, am I allowed to ride that scooter in the city? Or is it just I'm not allowed to rent a scooter in the city? So I think there are a lot of questions, but I certainly would, I'd hesitate to take away another option to move around. I'm not a scooter person myself, but folks, I was in LA not too long ago, and they were just zipping around town in them, and it's scared me to death, but they're functioning, so. I just think we need to look at them in the light of a golf cart or a bicycle. That same, are we gonna outlaw golf carts? Are we gonna outlaw bicycles? So, or is it just the rental of them?
Right.
So, yeah, I agree with the mayor that this should be treated as well as the bikes. You know, the bike rental. I mean, a bike and a scooter might require some little different skills, but at the end of the day, is the same concept. You know, two wheels, moving someone from A to B. So I think that if we're going to look into the scooter, we also need to look into the bike rentals as well at the same time. And maybe if there is any legislation for bikes, then should be applied similar to the scooters. Maybe, it's an idea to look if the bikes is regulated, then use the same or all of the regulation from the bike for the scooter. So I think that they should go in parallel, those two vehicles.
You mentioned some of the innovative solutions. You mentioned Ann Arbor. They just passed basically a request for companies, a limited amount of companies to come through. It gets on here. Sorry, it's at the bottom. San Francisco just went through the same problem that Atlanta did. And that. My apologies. So they were overrun with scooters, much like Atlanta is now. So what they did about 6 months ago is they initiated a pilot program. The Scoot and Skip are the two companies. That sounds like a radio country morning show. Scoot and Skip are the only two ones in town currently, and they got over a dozen applications, but they focused on safety with the free helmets, detailed instructions on parking, and make sure to warn users to stay off the sidewalks. So they limited their fleet to 600 at first, then another 600. But what was interesting about San Francisco is to end your ride, to stop being charged money, you had to lock it up, either to a parking meter or something like this, or I saw some attached to trees, and they actually divided up the territories. Some overlap here. I don't know if you guys know San Francisco, but the Bay Bridge is right here, Golden Gate's right there. But they have different territories around the city. So, if we ever got to that, this would probably be a good approach just to limit the fleet. So just something to consider.
And then you showed in your presentation a slide with around 14 scooters in one parking space, which in theory means that you have around 14 cars out of the road. So, in one parking space, you can put around 14 scooters. I counted quick and dirty, which means that one car you can, one spot can take theoretically 14 cars out of the road. So, maybe allocating a parking space for 14 or 15 scooters is not a bad idea.
Okay, so we'll
Thank you, guys.
keep looking at different ideas, keep thinking if they show up in Roswell, what we would do, and we'll keep a pulse on what other cities around the country are doing. If there's anybody else coming up with any better ideas, we just keep an eye on this one then.
Yeah, I do think we need to be prepared to act if we start to see them showing up at an accelerated rate. So I would ask that we get, if there's it's probably quarterly or something, unless something happens, right? Look in the app and see if all of a sudden we notice a lot of scooters. But in the meantime.
We'll keep you posted if we see anything.
And thank you for the presentation.
Great, thank you for the
Thanks, Dave.
presentation.
Thanks, gents. Item number 10, consideration of State Route 9 pedestrian connectivity.
Thank you, Gary.
Mr. Ralph.
So just some background on this item. So we all are very familiar. We have a parking issue on the Canton Street and the areas around it. And we have a whole bunch of parking here, the City Hall and the Cultural Arts Center, that's available during the peak hours when parking is an issue on the other side of Highway 9. So we have talked about different ways to connect pedestrians from the two sides of Highway 9. So the previous efforts by the city completed the East Alley project with paid parking. So it's an active, completed project that has helped. The city has leased 2 parking spots and I guess made an arrangement with the church to help with with the parking. The trolley, the city pays for a trolley that runs from the City Hall parking and a couple other places, takes people to the Canton Street area. In the past, we have also looked at the pedestrian bridge across Highway 9. So that was an idea back in the day. It's an inactive project with no funding. Staff is not working on it. It was never a great idea to begin with. Last one we looked at was the underpass. So that's also an inactive project with no funding. It's a very expensive undertaking, so it's not a priority of the day. Staff still thinks it's a great idea because it accommodates multimodal pedestrian activity, bicycles and golf carts with no interaction with the vehicular traffic. So that is kind of the safest way to get people across. But like I said, it's an inactive project. Staff is not working on it due to funding and some other constraints on it. So in the current fiscal year, we have 500,000 for the connectivity research and to do some projects. This was discussed at the July 2018 work session and at the October 2018 committee meeting. We got some guidance from you, and we used 20,000 of that 500,000 and got some outside help just to get a fresh look at all the different ideas we've had talking about in the past and get some community input. So Roswell DOT and ComDev, we worked together and added the scope to the Historic District Master Plan that is underway by TSW consulting firm. They have reps in the audience today. They walked the study area with residents and staff and created projects based on some input they received at a charrette held at the City Hall. And the list of projects that they came up with that has also been reviewed by GDOT. So just to orient ourselves, so the north is to the right side of the slide. So this first red circle is Highway 9 and Magnolia Canton Street intersection. This one is Highway 9 Norcross intersection. And this last red circle is the existing traffic signal on 9 and Woodstock. And then this yellow circle is the future possible traffic signal at the Southern Skillet property. And for that, I can tell you, based on the traffic study conducted by the developer, it's looking very promising. So and staff is, of course, very supportive of that. So will probably happen if the developer is still moving forward with their plans. So this is like a half-a-mile stretch of Highway 9 from Magnolia, Canton Street, all the way to Woodstock. So in this half a mile, we could have 4 signalized crossing opportunities for pedestrians to cross. So just average is like about 675 feet. So if you come up at any point on this stretch, you could go either left or right and walk like 400 or 500 feet, 300 feet to get to a pedestrian crossing. This is pretty good in itself, but we know the area, we know the needs, we know the problems, so we looked at further how else we could improve upon that. So here is the list of projects that came out of the study conducted by the consultant. So the first one you see on the list, the numbers are not the priority. The priorities are the other end. So the suggestions came from the consultant, the priority came from staff. So the first one is the enhanced sidewalk on Norcross streets. That's the portion of Norcross between Highway 9 and Josephine Skinner on the south side, which is the City Hall side. So we could do an 8 feet wide trail, basically, a wider sidewalk along that stretch. Number 2 is the Elizabeth Way streetscape project. So we could do some, beautification improvements, maybe add a median or something. There's not a lot of room, but we could look at the Elizabeth Way to make it more attractive for pedestrian activity. Number 3 is the on-street parking on Josephine Skinner Drive, so that's like around the library. This was discussed before as well. Number 4A is the enhanced sidewalks along Highway 9 between Magnolia Street and Norcross Street. So that'll be the stretch of Highway 9 between Magnolia and Norcross on the City Hall side. There's an existing sidewalk there, but we could widen it to 8 feet. It'll be a very expensive project because it drops here and it'll obviously impact some trees. But that's an option. 4B is the enhanced sidewalk along Highway 9 between Norcross Street and Fraser Street. So that's going further north along Highway 9 from Norcross all the way to Fraser. That's like along the Southern Skillet property and some more areas. There's an existing sidewalk there, but we could make it a wider sidewalk. And part of that could be done by the Southern Skillet property when it redevelops. 5A, that's a mid-block crossing warrant study. That's for the Hawk on Highway 9. So that's the one of the things we could do. So 5B is actually the Hawk. So it's a mid-block crossing, a Hawk signal with landscape median refuge island. And this is the location where the East Alley comes out to Highway 9. It could sit somewhere over there. 5C, as recommended by the consultant, is the mid-block crossing, another Hawk on Norcross Street. So that would be somewhere here between, crossing Norcross Street between 9 and Josephine Skinner. That's one suggestion. And then number 6 is the accessible pedestrian walkways through City Hall grounds and Smith Plantation. So again, this is the City Hall property, Smith Plantation. So anything that I guess connects the parking lots around the City Hall to the future Hawk location. And that's one project where we've been talking to Rex and Parks Department, and they're also going to need some guidance on where to put them, how would they look. If there's any guidance for Jeff Leatherman, you could provide it to them as part of the conversation later. Number 7 is a new pedestrian connection. So that would connect, as recommended by the consultant. So this is Norcross Street and the variant. So they were suggesting to have like a path to connect to the Southern Skillet property. So that would be kind of like on private property. Maybe when this area gets redeveloped, the area south of the Southern Skillet property, maybe it could happen then, but just another idea to improve, access to this area from the Southern Skillet if it has any public parking. So that was kind of the list of ideas that came from the consultant. And anywhere you see a staff priority listed, that's what we are recommending to either move forward or keep on the list to work in the future. So priority number 1 would be the Hawk on Highway 9. We can start working on that. Another number 1 priority could be for Rex and Parks Department to work on any trails, any paths on the City Hall property and the Southern Skillet property to connect the parking here to the Hawk. And then we're also saying priority number 2 would be the enhanced sidewalk along Norcross Street. That's on the City Hall side between Josephine Skinner and Highway 9, a wider sidewalk. And we are also saying the wider sidewalk along 9 between Magnolia and Norcross, a wider sidewalk. Although it's going to be a very expensive project with some impacts, but still it'd be a good project to do sometime in the future. Rest are, there are suggestions, good suggestions. We're not recommending to do them at this point in time or investigate any further for the time being. this just shows the location of the priority projects. Again, the Hawk, the trails on the City Hall and Smith Plantation property to connect to the Hawk, the wider path along Norcross, and a wider sidewalk along 9. This is just a graphic that shows where the Hawk would locate. This is East Alley, so where it comes out on Highway 9, it'll be staggered with the raised median, and then a wider sidewalk along this stretch of Highway 9 on the City Hall side. So this is another graphic of how Hawk would look like. So the way we would suggest, so of course it's a state road, we're gonna need the permits and approval from GDOT. So the consultant spoke with GDOT, they're open to the idea if it warrants. And the main warrant for a Hawk traffic signal is 20 pedestrians per hour. So we obviously don't have that. Hopefully nobody's crossing at this spot, but then what we could do is we could count like a couple of Alive and Roswell events. We have done that in the past, and try and make a case that some of those pedestrians that are crossing at the Norcross signal and at the Magnolia signal, they would shift if there was a safer way to cross here, and which actually makes a lot of sense. A lot of people would actually do that if there was a access from the City Hall parking lot to the Hawk, so they could get into the East Alley and get into the main area of Canton Street. So we could, I think we make a good case to GDOT. They may be open to it. That's what they have said. So, but then again, so this is, of course, Highway 9 carries a lot of traffic. So what we were gonna suggest, the way we were gonna try and convince GDOT is during the peak hours, when there's a lot of traffic, the Hawk is gonna work synchronized with the 2 adjacent traffic signals. That means it's not gonna be like demand responsive. You push the pedestrian button to cross, and then you wait a little. While the 2 adjacent traffic signals, they finish their cycle, and then they stop the traffic, and then the Hawk comes on for the pedestrian to cross. So it's not going to be spontaneous when you hit the button during peak hours. Yeah, that's just another way showing where the Hawk is green and the rest of the traffic is stopped. During the off-peak hours, the Hawk actually could work independent of the 2 traffic signals. So if during off-peak hours you're a pedestrian, you push the button, it's going to stop the traffic, and then you cross. So you don't have to wait more than like a few seconds in that instance. So it's also saying like free mode during the off-peak hours. And then another thing, if the Hawk just got served, pedestrians pushed the button, they crossed, and then someone else came 10 seconds later and pushed it another time, then it's going to wait for like a minute for it to serve again. So those are, some of the things we need to show to GDOT, that we're keeping in mind that there's a lot of traffic on there, keeping in mind the vehicular traffic, but at the same time, providing another safe access for the pedestrians to cross. So the next steps, the first thing, the traffic study. GDOT requires a traffic engineering study. That's going to do the warrant analysis and all. That is something we have the capability in-house. So we're gonna, if you give us that guidance to move forward, we can start that study and then work with GDOT on getting permits, and then of course the design and construction, depending upon how things go with GDOT for this Hawk on Highway 9. Second would be the Rec and Parks lead for providing connections from City Hall parking lot to the Hawk. So those are the 2 projects we feel comfortable, not knowing what we would want to do on the City Hall property and Smith Plantation for the trails. Those are the 2 projects we feel comfortable moving forward with the money we have. So now we have $480,000. So we feel comfortable moving forward with those 2. if, during that effort, if he felt there's some more money, we could start the design for this Norcross wider sidewalk between Josephine Skinner and Highway 9. If that's one of those projects you want us to move forward with. We can also look at, that didn't come up in the consultant study, but we know we discussed it before. We can use some of the money and put some additional raised medians on the Highway 9 corridor. But please remember, anytime we put in a raised median, it impacts somebody's driveway. We heard that a lot when we did them the last time as part of the Midtown project. So every time we do a raised median, it impacts somebody's driveway, so we hear from them. So those are all the next steps we listed, so just want to get some guidance.
Mohammed, thank you for doing all this. This is, I'm 100% in support of your recommendations. Just a couple quick questions. You've designed the HOXIS signal to be at East Alley versus Elizabeth Way. Any particular engineering design that was required for that?
So Hawk is supposed to be like a mid-block crossing,
Right.
because if it was at Elizabeth Way, cars coming out, they won't have a red.
Got it. Thank you.
That would be like a regular traffic signal, so it has to be a mid-block, and there's a minimum distance, like 200 feet. Scott, if you remember, yeah, there's a minimum distance that it has to have from any side street.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, I echo Councilmember Tiser's sentiments. Great study, great analysis. Totally support the priorities you guys have laid out. Sounds like, we do have some money from last year that we could execute some of this stuff. And how long does the traffic study and then approval for the Hawk take? Because I think that the important thing is we don't want the Hawk to lead to nowhere, right? So the pathways on the City Hall side of Highway 9 will be really important as part of this. So what's the overall process to get the
So
approval?
for the traffic engineering study, we want to include at least 2 Alive in Roswell events, count them and try and make a case. So I'd say a couple months for the study, and then with GDOT, if things go really, really quickly, it's going to be another couple of months, but we can never guarantee how quickly GDOT is going to respond. They could take years to give us permits, but in this case, hopefully, if they agree, we're going to try our best to get them to agree to this one. Hopefully a couple, 3 months, and then a few more months for like design and construction.
And what's the cost of the Hawk?
I'm going to say with the median and landscaping, towards the high side, it'd be like 125, 150 max, maybe 100,000. We'll just have to see.
Do we have currently 480 people crossing on the existing location right now? Or because this might be an issue for GDOT, you need 20 persons per hour.
20 per hour.
So
No,
24
so
hours,
just
so
20 for
480.
one peak hour, that's it.
Okay.
That's the word, not
Per peak
10
hour.
hours a day or 20 hours a day. They just say if you have 20 pedestrian crossing in any 1 hour of the day,
Okay.
that gets it. And I
Do we
think
have this on the existing, do we have these 20 already?
maybe not on a routine day, but
the existing
on Alive and Roswell day, definitely.
Okay.
So we want to use our events, and we'll clearly tell them that this was counted during events, and it's not just the 7 Alive in Roswell. There's like, I wish the Youth Day Parade was like during the upcoming months, if you count that.
Or weekends, weekend.
Yeah,
night,
on the
weekends.
weekends. So yeah, we have the need, and
Okay.
we could
Justify
maybe
the
try
20
and
per
count.
hour on a peak.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we'll make the warrant.
On a farmer's market day, there's a lot of people coming in and out across
Okay.
for Saturday mornings.
Yeah, so we can count
Across,
that as
you
well.
know, I mean, if I could take a shovel up there and start doing this now, I would, because this is really important. I think it's gonna make a huge difference, as far as a way to get across, so I'm really excited about it, so as quick as possible, let's
We'll
move.
try and expedite as much as we can.
I think it's all great. I think that they all will work together. I think they're all interrelated, so it would be great if we could just work closely to do it all. I think one a really important part is just seeing how the trails on the City Hall property, interact with the sidewalks that are existing. And I think looking at the sidewalks on Norcross and along Alpharetta Highway will really just help increase the visibility of the access to City Hall. So was just curious about estimated cost for those sidewalks, and then what you've looked at in terms of a master plan basically for that property and the interconnection.
Do you want to tackle the sidewalk cost first?
So remember, I'm suggesting to do the Hawk first.
First, right, sure.
And then, I guess what supports the Hawk is the trails on the Smith Plantation and City Hall property. So those two, we should move forward immediately.
Right.
I'm not sure what we are looking for, huh? Sure, go ahead.
As far as costs go, we're pretty optimistic we'll be able to afford the design of number one. The unknown right now, constructing 6, constructing 5B, designing 1. Will we have enough money left in that 480 to construct 1 is the wild card. And that's why we wanted to take that as a tier 2 approach, simply because we wouldn't want to spend some of our 480 constructing number 1 and then not have enough money left for the trails beyond.
For the more reachable, attainable options to do this first. Absolutely.
And I think for the trail system, what from a council perspective that I'm looking for today is, we're looking at kind of connectivity essentially from the parking lots here, in and around the Smith Plantation property to Norcross here, and then also up onto Alpharetta. The question of golf carts and accessibility of golf carts through this portion of the property. The Hawk is going to be, as it's currently laid out, designed to accommodate that. And the question just of a direction from a design perspective, are we working on trying to accommodate that throughput of golf cart travel through this property? That dictates my materials that we're using, the width of the trails, and how we functionally start to look at that trail system itself.
Mohammed, I don't think you're designing that Hawk system for golf carts, are you? Because you got to go this way.
Actually, I was gonna look into that because, who knows, eventually one day, we have talked about that shuttling people. Maybe that shuttle stays on this side of Highway 9, just drops people at Hawk. It's not gonna be, since we're doing the Hawk, it's not gonna be a huge addition to it if it's just wider, larger, to accommodate golf carts.
Yeah, I walked from the employee parking lot across, and I also walked from the parking deck in Alpharetta to one of the first restaurants across the street. The time it took me to do those was about the same.
Okay.
So, Jeff, I think from my standpoint, the focus is going to be on open, safe-looking, well-lit pedestrian.
I agree, but I would like to see the costs of both, because we did have some interest, Sean, of people using City Hall parking lot at night, or businesses on Canton using City Hall parking lot at night for valet parking, and they would then shuttle the people over in a gym cart or whatnot, or their valet people back. And they had a big problem because they had no way to, their insurance company was having a problem with them driving all around and this, that, and the other. So it could be an option that opens up that opportunity if it's cost effective. So I would at least like to see what it looks like.
Could also put e-scooters on that path.
I guess I would say, try to find one designated route for golf carts, but not to make all the paths golf cart accessible.
Yeah, and that was the gist of the question is, if we're looking to try to accommodate that, is just getting that direction. And we can do that and provide various options of what that potentially looks like and how it interacts with the pedestrian traffic around the Smith property. I think what we're starting to see as development continues around City Hall is this is becoming, a very walkable complex. We have a lot of pedestrians not only here during the workday, but also on the weekends, walking their dogs, out with their kids. And so we've got an interest definitely in looking at this connectivity and improving that connectivity all the way around the property.
Well, and as more events come to City Hall grounds, like the Day of Hope last weekend, It was here on City Hall grounds, and there were people coming from every which direction to get over here. And so as we continue, as this becomes more of a active place, I think it's big.
Can we do it like a, trail analysis of what we have right now and how this could be either improved or do more new ones? But maybe what we have, if we improve what we have and we enhance what we have, maybe it's enough to move people around in this area. So, a clear understanding of the current path, how it works, how it could work better with some improvement or enhancement, and then see if it's needed more money to do more trails in the area. These existing ones.
Yeah, that would be our intent to, if we're moving through with kind of the options that transportation laid out, one of that is, from our perspective, it's that enhancement of the existing or potentially building new. So it's a little bit of both, and I think it's also a matter, if you look at, around the Smith Plantation, kind of right in this area, kind of our City Hall pathways essentially stop almost right up this line right here, and then it transitions more into that historic Smith Plantation property. These are some more gravel and kind of natural surfaces, but the trail alignments in some cases are already there. It's just how are we using those trail alignments? How are we promoting safe access? As Councilmember Tizer said, they're not currently lit or they're partially lit right now, and so it really isn't promoting that pedestrian access in the later part of the day, in the evening as well.
And I think this is a great opportunity to make Smith Plantation shine and be, in the spotlight. So obviously, I know you guys will be working with the folks at Smith Plantation that spend a lot of their time focusing on it. But thank you for this. I think it's great, and I'm excited for us to move forward.
Good, thank you.
Is that all you need?
Yes, I was just gonna make a couple of quick announcements. So I have promoted Rob Delros as the deputy in Transportation Department. And congratulations, Rob. Rob has done great for many, many years, and we make a great team. Things would be awesome. And we have also promoted Greg Nicholas as our engineering design manager in the back. Thank you.
Well done. Thanks, Mohammed.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you. We are adjourned.